Today's story is a chilling tale with terrifying discovery of abduction, a father's desperate search, and a shocking truth about a disturbed man. It's a story of unimaginable horror, unwavering hope, and a miraculous rescue, but with a heartbreaking cost. But before we get into the story, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. Okay, so brace yourself and let's get into it. A shadow fell over a family when a young girl and her mother embarked on what was meant to be a simple fishing trip, disappearing without a trace into the vast expanse of the ocean. No sooner had their boat vanished over the horizon than a tempest of epic proportions materialized out of nowhere, hitting the waters with such ferocity that all hope was dashed to pieces. Everyone in the tight-knit community wrote them off as lost at sea. A tragic causality with no chance of survival. Yet, against all odds, a full 8 months later, when the dust had settled and the initial shock had worn off, a lone fisherman out on his morning rounds stumbled upon something truly out of the ordinary. A discovery so profound it would turn their world upside down. The quaint, small maritime town of Greyhoor had always been inextricably linked to the sea, its very identity forged in the brine and spray. The ceaseless, rhythmic crash of waves against the rugged, rocky shore and the haunting, distant cries of seagulls were the constant, familiar sounds that formed the everyday backdrop to life in that place. These sounds were once considered constant, reliable, and unchanging, the very bedrock of existence in Greyhoor. But for Eli Wells, the very essence of these familiar sounds had undergone a sea change, morphing into agonizing reminders of the immense void the ruthless ocean had swallowed whole from his life. 8 months, that was the agonizing stretch of time that had elapsed since he had last laid eyes upon his beloved wife, Hannah, and their precious daughter, Sophie. 8 months had come and gone since their radiant, smiling faces had last graced his sight before dissolving into the distant horizon, snatched away by the very sea that had once been the shared passion and profound bond of their family. Eli stood rooted to the spot at the edge of the small marina, the identical place where he had exchanged what would become their final, heartbreaking goodbyes on that fateful, illumined morning. The aged, weather-beaten wooden dock groaned and creaked beneath his boots with every subtle shift as the gentle breeze, laden with the pungent scent of salt and fish, caressed his face. He gently closed his eyes, allowing his mind to drift back to the cherished memory of Hannah's bright, infectious laugh as she effortlessly loaded their fishing gear onto the boat. Sophie, a mere 9 years old at the time, had been bouncing with excitement, her blonde braids swinging wildly with each movement as she proudly displayed her child-sized fishing rod, a cherished gift Eli had presented to her for her birthday just a few weeks prior. "You sure you can't come, Daddy?" Sophie had asked, her big, blue eyes wide with disappointment, a lump forming in Eli's throat at the memory. "I promised, Mr. Carson I'd help fix his boat today, sweetheart," he had gently explained, affectionately ruffling her hair, hoping to soften the blow. "But you'll have fun with Mom. She'll show you that secret spot where she caught that monster bass last summer." Hannah had then offered him a tender, knowing smile, her experienced hands meticulously checking their supplies one last time with the precision of a seasoned pro. "Don't you worry," she had called out, her voice a comforting echo in his memory, "we'll bring back dinner." "Be back before the storm hits," Eli had called after them as their small boat slowly pulled away from the dock, little knowing how ironic those words would become. The initial weather report had merely hinted at the possibility of afternoon showers, nothing serious enough to raise an eyebrow. How quickly that seemingly innocent forecast had taken a sharp turn into a truly catastrophic event. Now, Eli instinctively pulled his jacket tighter around him as a sudden, raw gust of wind cut through him like a knife. He came here often, to this very spot, drawn by an unspoken, desperate hope that somehow, standing here might magically conjure them back to him. The search that had ensued had been nothing short of exhaustive. The Coast Guard, the hardy local fishermen, and even dedicated volunteer divers, they had all spent days, then weeks, combing the waters with a fine-tooth comb. The storm that day had been truly unprecedented, materializing with a lightning-fast intensity and striking with a violence that had shocked even the most seasoned sailors in Greyhoor, leaving them reeling. Just 3 days after their devastating disappearance, fragments of their fishing boat had begun to wash ashore, along with a scattering of their personal belongings. There was Hannah's trusty waterproof backpack, Sophie's cherished fishing hat adorned with a cartoon fish stitched onto the front, and a plain plastic water bottle with Sophie's name scrawled on it in permanent marker. The authorities, left with no other logical conclusion, had reluctantly declared what seemed patently obvious. The boat had capsized in the overwhelming storm, and Hannah and Sophie had tragically been lost to the sea. But Eli, with every fiber of his being, had refused to accept it. He had moved heaven and earth to organize additional searches, focusing intensely on Sealbone Island, the nearest wooded, uninhabited landmass located approximately 15 miles offshore. Teenagers from Greyhoor occasionally ventured there for bonfires and daredevil antics, but it remained largely untouched by human interference. His rationale was simple. If Hannah and Sophie had, by some miracle, managed to make it to shore there, then they might still be alive. But alas, they had found absolutely nothing to go on, neither on Sealbone Island nor on any of the other smaller islands that dotted the coastline like scattered pearls. Eventually, the official search operation had been called off, but Eli, stubborn as a mule, had continued his relentless pursuit. Every weekend, weather permitting, he would steadfastly take his boat out, meticulously diving in different areas, steadily expanding his search perimeter each time, stubbornly refusing to give up hope. This particular morning was no different from the others. Eli had already loaded his diving equipment onto his boat, mentally preparing himself for yet another exhaustive search. He was acutely aware of the whispers and hushed tones, what people said behind his back, that he was in denial, that he needed to face the music and accept the truth, and that it was high time for him to begin to heal. But how, he silently wondered, could he possibly move on without the bedrock of certainty, without the elusive peace that true closure could provide? As he made preparations to cast off from the dock, his phone suddenly sprang to life, its screen boldly displaying Greyhoor Police. His heart, a hammer in his chest, leapt to his throat as he answered the call. "Mr. Wells, this is Officer Reynolds." "Yes, I'm here," Eli managed to say, his voice tight with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. "We need you to come to the station right away. There's been a development in your family's case." Eli's hand instinctively tightened its grip on the phone. "What kind of development?" he pressed, his voice barely a whisper. "A local fisherman came in with information he believes he may have seen. Well, it's better if we discuss this in person." The officer paused, then added, "I'm at the marina now. I was just about to head out for my weekly search." "We'll wait for you here," Officer Reynolds assured him. "The fisherman's with us." After hanging up, Eli quickly unloaded his equipment back into his car. His hands shook like a leaf as he changed from his wetsuit back into his regular clothes. Could this truly be it? He dared to hope, the long-awaited breakthrough he had been praying for with every fiber of his being. He deliberately tried to temper his hope, knowing all too well the bitter taste of previous disappointments. There had been false leads before, well-meaning but ultimately fruitless reports that had led him nowhere but deeper into the mire of disappointment. The drive to the Coastal State Police outpost took less than 10 minutes. The small, unassuming building, staffed by no more than 5 dedicated officers who handled everything from minor disputes to the occasional drunk boater, served as the veritable heart of law enforcement in Greyhoor. Officer Reynolds, a figure of calm authority, met him at the entrance. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Mr. Wells." "What's happening?" Eli asked, the words tumbling out, unable to wait another second. "Come this way." Reynolds led him down a short corridor to a small, Spartan meeting room where another officer sat with a man Eli recognized as a local fisherman. He had seen the man around the harbor, a familiar face, but didn't know him personally. "Mr. Wells, this is Tomas Herrera," Officer Reynolds introduced. "He came in this morning with information that might be relevant to your family's case." The fisherman stood, extending a weathered hand. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, Mr. Wells." Eli shook his hand, intently studying the lines etched into the man's face. "What did you see?" Tomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat as they all took their places at the table. "I was out early this morning, making a beeline for Wolf Island," he began, his voice a low rumble. "I ferry preserved seafood and mechanical parts to the Marine Research Station there every few days, rain or shine." Eli nodded, intimately familiar with the isolated station situated on one of the larger islands in the chain. "On my return route, I decided to cut across the old shipping lane near the decommissioned Wolf Rock Lighthouse. It shaves off about 40 minutes. Tomas paused, seemingly choosing his words carefully, as if walking on eggshells. "It was thick as pea soup this morning, the fog, that is. Visibility was poor, to say the least. But as I passed the lighthouse I thought I saw a young girl standing on the dock outside the lighthouse. She was waving at me." Eli's heart began to pound in his chest like a drum. "A girl? How old?" he pressed, scarcely daring to breathe. "Young," Tomas replied, "maybe 8 or 9. It was hard to tell in the fog, but something about her seemed oddly familiar." Tomas then leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It wasn't until I got back to the harbor and saw one of the missing person flyers, the ones with your daughter's picture, that it clicked into place. The girl I saw looked remarkably similar to your daughter." Officer Reynolds interjected smoothly. "Mr. Herrera wasn't completely certain, which is precisely why he came to us rather than contacting you directly." "The lighthouse is about 10 miles offshore of Wolf Island," Eli murmured, "and there are stories about it, aren't there?" "Stories?" Eli asked, his brow furrowed. "Just local superstition," Tomas said quickly, almost dismissively. "Some say it's haunted. That's partly why I didn't stop to investigate. That, and the fog was thick as a brick wall. I figured if there really was a child there, there must be an adult as well. It might even be the lighthouse keeper's daughter. But when I saw the flyer again, I felt it was my duty to report what I saw." Eli turned to Officer Reynolds, a new determination lighting his eyes. "The lighthouse is still operational, isn't it?" "Not officially, no," Reynolds confirmed, consulting some notes in front of him. "It was decommissioned years ago and sold to a private owner. A man named Malcolm Vire purchased it about 22 years ago. He's listed as maintaining it for historical preservation purposes." "Do you have contact information for this buyer?" Eli asked, trying with all his might to keep the urgency from his voice. Officer Reynolds nodded, reaching for the phone on the table. "We have a number here, but it may be outdated." He dialed and waited, then frowned. "No dial tone. The number appears to be disconnected." Eli stood up, his impatience getting the better of him. "We need to check the lighthouse. If there's any chance at all." "Now, Mr. Wells," Officer Reynolds began, a note of caution in his voice, but Tomas cut him off. "The weather's clear today. I could lead a boat out there." Officer Reynolds looked between the two men, then sighed, clearly giving in. "I'll get authorization for a patrol boat. If there's really a child there, we need to check it out, ghosts or no ghosts." As the officer stepped out to make arrangements, Eli turned to Tomas, his gratitude evident. "Thank you for coming forward." The fisherman nodded solemnly. "I hope it leads to something good for you, Mr. Wells." "I truly do." Within the hour, Eli found himself on a patrol boat with Tomas and 2 officers, heading with a palpable sense of urgency toward the Wolf Rock Lighthouse. As they left the harbor, Eli couldn't help but stare intently at the horizon, where the faint silhouette of the lighthouse would later appear, a beacon of a potentially life-altering discovery. After 8 grueling months of searching, could the answer have been hiding in plain sight all along, in a supposedly abandoned lighthouse? He fiercely tried to temper his hope, reminding himself of past disappointments, but as the boat cut through the waves, Eli felt a stir of something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. The tantalizing possibility that this enduring nightmare might finally be drawing to a close. The patrol boat approached the Wolf Rock Lighthouse just after noon, the imposing structure rising dramatically from a craggy outcropping in the vast ocean, a stark gray column silhouetted against the brilliant blue sky. Built in 1911, it had weathered countless storms, standing as a steadfast sentinel for mariners for over a century before finally being decommissioned. As they drew closer, Eli's eyes were immediately riveted to a small, severely damaged wooden boat pulled up onto the rocks near the lighthouse dock. The hull was badly battered, making it undeniably unusable, but its mere presence was undeniable evidence that someone had been here. "That wasn't there last time I passed by," Tomas murmured, pointing a weathered finger at the wreck. Officer Carter, the more senior of the 2 police officers, expertly steered their boat alongside the small concrete dock and securely tied it off. "Everyone, stay alert," he cautioned, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what we're walking into here." The 4 men disembarked, the concrete dock feeling solid, yet weather-beaten beneath their feet. Eli found himself instinctively holding his breath as they cautiously approached the heavy lighthouse door. Officer Carter knocked firmly on the metallic surface, the resounding clang echoing eerily across the water. "Police, is anyone inside?" he called out, his voice clear and authoritative. Silence was their only answer. After several more persistent attempts yielded no response, Carter tried the door handle, but it was firmly locked. "The girl I saw was outside on this dock," Tomas confirmed, pointing to the very spot where they stood. "She was right about here, waving." Officer Carter looked skeptical, his brow furrowed. "And you're sure it wasn't just a trick of the light or the fog?" Tomas shook his head firmly. "I saw someone. I'm sure of it." Eli walked to the edge of the dock, gazing down at the destroyed boat. It was small, perhaps 14 feet long, the kind typically used for day trips rather than serious offshore fishing. The damage to the hull looked extensive. It had clearly been battered senseless by sharp rocks or a violent storm. "This boat," Eli said quietly, almost to himself, "it could have been drifting for months before washing up here." As they stood contemplating their next move, a distant sound caught their attention, a boat engine, growing louder with each passing second. They turned to see a modern motorboat approaching rapidly from the direction of the mainland. "Someone's coming," Officer Reynolds stated, his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. The approaching boat slowed significantly as it neared the lighthouse, the man at the helm intently studying them with obvious surprise. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with weathered skin and a shock of white hair. After a moment's hesitation, he skillfully maneuvered his boat alongside the dock and cut the engine. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he called out, his voice steady but with an underlying edge of weariness. Officer Carter stepped forward, his badge held prominently in hand. "Coastal Police. Are you Malcolm Vire?" The man's eyebrows rose slightly as he stepped from his boat onto the dock. "I am. This is my property. What brings police all the way out here?" "We received a report of a child seen at this lighthouse earlier today," Carter explained calmly. "We're here to investigate." Malcolm's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a fleeting change. "A child here." He let out a short, hollow laugh. "Well, that certainly explains the unexpected visitors. Do you know anything about this report, Mr. Vire?" Reynolds pressed. Malcolm seemed to consider the question carefully. "I was here this morning with my niece. We were collecting some of my old belongings I've stored in the lighthouse." "That must be who your witness saw." Eli felt his hope begin to deflate like a punctured balloon, but something about Malcolm's demeanor kept him tense, an uneasy feeling in the pit of his stomach. "Your niece?" Officer Carter asked. Would you mind showing us a photo of her? Malcolm's posture visibly stiffened. What for? I don't appreciate the implication that I'm telling tall tales about my own family. No implication intended, Carter said smoothly, his tone placating. It's just standard procedure when investigating reports involving children. Malcolm pulled his phone from his pocket with noticeable reluctance. He swiped through it, then briefly turned the screen toward them, displaying a young girl with short blonde hair before quickly tucking the phone away again. Satisfied? He asked coldly, his voice laced with annoyance. Officer Carter turned to Tomas. Could this be the girl you saw this morning? Tomas studied Malcolm, then nodded slowly. It could be. She looked similar enough. Like I said, it was foggy and I was some distance away. Eli stepped forward, unable to contain himself any longer. Are you certain? You said at the station that she looked like my daughter from the flyer. I wasn't sure what I saw, Tomas said, looking uncomfortable, clearly on the spot. The girl in that photo does look similar to what I saw this morning, a little girl in a red jacket. In the fog, details were hard to make out. Eli felt the brief spark of hope dim further, like a candle flickering out, the crushing weight of another dead end beginning to settle on his shoulders. Mr. Wells, Officer Carter said quietly, his voice full of compassion. I understand your disappointment, but we need to be realistic. The odds of your daughter being here, alone in this lighthouse, after all this time. Eli nodded mechanically, trying to process the overwhelming burden of yet another disappointment. Malcolm watched this exchange with a flat, inscrutable expression. Is this what this is about? You thought my niece was this man's missing daughter. His tone had a distinct defensive edge. I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but you're not taking my niece from me. No one is trying to take anyone, Officer Reynolds assured him calmly. We're just following up on a report. Malcolm relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained wary, like a hawk. Mr. Vire, Carter said, since we've come all this way, would you mind if we have a look inside the lighthouse? What for? Malcolm asked sharply, his hands beginning to tremble slightly. Just to be thorough. We're already here, after all. Malcolm looked as though he desperately wanted to refuse, but after a moment's careful consideration, he pulled a set of keys from his pocket. Fine, he said curtly, but mind you, it's dusty and not particularly pleasant inside. I only use it for storage these days. As Malcolm unlocked the door, Eli noticed that the tremor in his hands had intensified. The heavy metal door swung open with a protesting creak, revealing a sparse interior dimly illuminated by light streaming through salt-crusted windows. The lighthouse was simple in its layout, a small living area at the base with basic furniture, a spiral staircase winding upward to the lantern room, and a door that presumably led to a storm cellar beneath. Feel free to look around, Malcolm said curtly. But please don't disturb my belongings. Tomas announced he would wait outside, finding the narrow confines of the lighthouse uncomfortable. Eli, the two officers, and Malcolm stepped inside. The interior smelled of dampness and disuse. A thick layer of dust covered most surfaces, though Eli noticed some areas appeared to have been recently disturbed. What's down there? Officer Carter asked, pointing to the storm cellar door. Storage, Malcolm replied evasively. Old equipment, furniture, personal items I don't have room for elsewhere. Mind if we take a look? Malcolm's jaw tightened, but he moved to the door and unlocked it. If you insist. The storm cellar was dimly lit by a single bulb that Malcolm switched on as they descended the short staircase. The space was crowded with various items, fishing equipment, old furniture, boxes, and several items covered with tarps. Eli noticed immediately how Malcolm positioned himself directly in front of an old wooden cabinet against the far wall. The positioning seemed deliberate, protective, almost as if he were guarding something. What's in the cabinet? Eli asked, unable to stop himself. Just more of the same, Malcolm said dismissively. Personal belongings, remnants from my previous life, family mementos. Nothing of interest to anyone but me. Officer Carter surveyed the room with a professional eye, but seemed to find nothing immediately suspicious. I think we've seen enough, Mr. Weir. Thank you for your cooperation. Malcolm nodded curtly and moved toward the door to usher them out. As he stepped away from the cabinet, Eli's eye caught something through a gap in the broken cabinet door, a pale-colored hat that looked strikingly familiar. His gaze then shifted to the corner of the room, partially covered by a tarp. There, leaning against the wall, were 2 fishing rods, one adult-sized and one smaller, child-sized. The color and design of the reel struck a painful chord of recognition. Malcolm cleared his throat loudly. Gentlemen, if you're finished. As they filed out of the storm cellar, Eli hung back. Those fishing rods, he said, his voice tight with a newfound suspicion. They look exactly like the ones my wife and daughter had. Malcolm's expression hardened, his face like a mask. They're mine and my late daughter's. May we see them? Officer Carter asked politely. I would prefer if you didn't, Malcolm said flatly. Those are cherished possessions from my deceased daughter. I don't even let my niece touch them. That's why they remain here rather than in my home. Carter nodded, respecting the boundary, but Eli wasn't ready to let it go. And the hat I saw in the cabinet, he pressed. It looks just like my wife's. A flicker of something, annoyance, fear, crossed Malcolm's face. Wait here, he said sharply. He disappeared back into the cellar, returning moments later with a hat and a fishing toolbox. I found this hat washed ashore months ago. If it's your wife's, take it. I have no use for it. Eli took the hat with trembling hands. It was indeed Hannah's, her favorite, a pale cream color with subtle stitching she'd added herself. And this toolbox, Eli said, noting the familiar brand. It's the same as my wife's. Malcolm's response came too quickly, almost defensive. It's mine. It's a common old brand popular for its quality. I've had it since my father gave it to me many years ago. I came here this morning to fetch this. The group proceeded to inspect the rest of the lighthouse, climbing the spiral staircase to the lantern room at the top, but found nothing further of note. As they emerged back outside into the bright sunlight, Eli clutched Hannah's hat in his hands, struggling with a mix of emotions. There was a sense of vindication at finding this small piece of her, but also a deepening suspicion about the man who had found it. Malcolm locked the lighthouse door and turned to face them. I trust that concludes your investigation. For now, Officer Carter said evenly. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Weir. As they prepared to depart, Officer Carter asked one final question. Mr. Weir, we'll need a reliable way to contact you. Is there a current phone number where you can be reached? Malcolm's expression soured. I don't have one anymore. I value my privacy. Then a current address, please, Carter pressed. Malcolm pointed toward the distant silhouette of Wolf Island. I live there, on the northern shore. My niece and I sometimes get visitors, tourists who pay us for direction and help navigating the island. His tone was clipped, impatient. I sail between Wolf Island, Sealbone, and Greyhor for food and supplies, but otherwise, I keep to myself. We may need to follow up with you, Officer Reynolds added. Then come to Wolf Island, Malcolm replied curtly. But I would appreciate it if my privacy isn't disturbed unnecessarily. With that, Malcolm boarded his boat and departed, his wake churning the water as he headed not toward Wolf Island, but in the direction of the mainland. Eli watched him go, a strange unease settling over him. That man is hiding something, he said quietly. Let's not jump to conclusions, Officer Carter cautioned as they boarded the patrol boat. But I agree, his behavior was peculiar. Tomas took the wheel, guiding them away from the lighthouse and back toward Greyhor. As the lighthouse receded in the distance, Eli clutched Hannah's hat, the tangible evidence of her presence at that lonely place. The fishing rod's in that room, Eli said after they'd been traveling for several minutes. They were exact matches for Hannah's and Sophie's. Same brand, same colors. Even the sizes were right. Hannah's was a Mariner Pro X6 gray trim with this special chrome reel. Not many people would pay for that model. I got it for her birthday 3 years ago. Officer Reynolds made a note. Could be a coincidence, Mr. Wells. That brand is expensive, but not unheard of around here. And the hat? That wasn't a coincidence. No, Reynolds agreed. That's definitely evidence your wife was there at some point, but it only confirms what we already suspected, that after the storm, some of your family's belongings washed up in various locations. Mr. Via claims he found it on the shore. Eli shook his head in frustration. It felt like he was hiding something. The way he positioned himself in front of that cabinet, how nervous he seemed when we asked about the fishing rods. We understand your frustration, Officer Carter said. We'll look more deeply into Mr. Vire's background when we return. I promise you that. The rest of the journey passed in tense silence. When they finally docked at Greyhor, the officers asked to take the hat as evidence, promising to return it to Eli after documenting it properly. Though reluctant to part with this piece of Hannah, Eli understood the necessity and handed it over. As the officers departed for the station, Eli found himself alone with Tomas on the dock. I still don't believe that man, Eli said, looking out over the water. What do you think? Tomas hesitated before answering. There was something off about him for sure, and that girl in his photo looked similar to what I saw this morning. He paused, choosing his words carefully. When I saw the girl this morning, her hair was short, just like the girl in that photo he showed us. Your daughter had hers in braids. Eli's heart skipped a beat. Sophie always wore her hair in braids. Hannah would never let her cut it. I apologize if I gave you false hope, Tomas said, his voice laced with regret. No, you're not. I should be thanking you. But you're still not sure it was the same girl. I don't know, Tomas admitted. But what I do find strange is his claim that he lives on Wolf Island. I've been sailing between those islands for 15 years, delivering supplies to the research station twice a week. I've never seen him or a young girl on Wolf Island, and I've never heard any of the researchers mention a man and child living there. Eli felt a chill run through him. So, he lied about where he lives? Possibly, Tomas said, or maybe he keeps to himself so much that our paths have never crossed. It's not a small island. He paused thoughtfully. I make my delivery run again tomorrow morning. I could keep an eye out. Maybe ask around at the research station if anyone knows this Vire character. Would you? I'd appreciate that. Eli pulled out his phone and they exchanged contact information. I should get going, Tomas said, glancing at the time. My wife will be wondering where I am, but I'll call you tomorrow after my run. I'll let you know if I learn anything. Thank you for everything you've done, Eli said, extending his hand. I can't tell you what it means to me. Tomas shook it firmly. I hope we find the truth, whatever it is. After Tomas departed, Eli walked back to his car at the police station. He sat behind the wheel for several long minutes, replaying the visit to the lighthouse over and over in his mind. The hat, the fishing rods, Malcolm's strange behavior, none of it made sense if Hannah and Sophie had simply drowned in the storm. And yet, the alternative, that they had somehow survived the storm, reached the lighthouse, and then what? That they had been kept there by a strange man with unclear motives seemed equally implausible, almost too outlandish to wrap his head around. Eli started his car and began the drive home, his mind churning with possibilities, both horrifying and hopeful. Eli had intended to drive straight home, but as the familiar streets of Greyhor passed by his window, he found his thoughts inexorably circling back to the fishing rods he'd glimpsed in the lighthouse. He simply couldn't shake the conviction that they belonged to Hannah and Sophie. On a sudden impulse, he changed course, steering toward the town's waterfront district. The Silver Anchor, Greyhor's oldest tavern, would be open by now, and Eli needed a place to think and perhaps to learn. The fishing community in Greyhor was tight-knit, like two peas in a pod. If anyone would know about Malcolm Vire, it would be the regulars at the Silver Anchor. The tavern was housed in a weathered building that had withstood the test of time, enduring more than a century of coastal storms. Inside, the warm wood paneling and nautical decor created an atmosphere that had changed little in decades, a place where time seemed to stand still. At this hour, only a handful of patrons occupied the tables, most of them older men with the weathered complexions of lifetime fishermen. Eli took a seat at the bar and ordered a beer from the bartender, a middle-aged man named Doug, who had run the place for as long as Eli had lived in Greyhor. As he waited for his drink, Eli pulled out his phone and searched for information about the fishing rod and toolbox he'd seen at the Lighthouse. The rod was a high-end model, part of a premium line from a respected manufacturer. It wasn't something a casual fisherman would typically invest in. When Doug returned with his beer, Eli asked, "Have you ever heard of a man named Malcolm Vire?" Doug's eyebrows rose slightly. "Vire? Now, that's a name I haven't heard in a while." He leaned against the bar. Odd fellow, kept to himself mostly. "Why do you ask?" "I met him today out at the Wolf Rock Lighthouse." Doug nodded slowly. "That tracks. He bought that place years ago. Some kind of engineer, I heard, came into money and decided to play lighthouse keeper." He paused, lowering his voice. "Though there's been talk." "What kind of talk?" Eli asked, keeping his tone as casual as possible despite his intense interest. "Oh, you know how small towns are. People gossip." Doug glanced around the nearly empty tavern before continuing. "Some say he's not right in the head. Spends weeks alone out at that lighthouse or on his boat. I heard he was building something out on Sealbone Island recently." "Sealbone?" Eli straightened, a new thought sparking in his mind. "He told the police he lives on Wolf Island." Doug's expression turned skeptical. "Wolf? Nah, that can't be right. The marine research folks would have mentioned a permanent resident, especially one with a child." "Child?" Eli asked sharply. "His niece, or so I heard." Doug shrugged. "Like I said, he keeps to himself. Most of what I know is secondhand at best." Eli took a long swig of his beer, trying to process this new information. "Where would I find his boat if he keeps one in Greyhor?" Doug thought for a moment. "Last I heard, he had some kind of boathouse set up in one of the inlet channels off the main harbor, hidden away behind the reeds and trees. Not many people go back there." Eli finished his beer and left a generous tip. "Thanks, Doug. You've been helpful. Hope you find what you're looking for," Doug called after him as Eli headed for the door. Outside, Eli immediately pulled out his phone and called Tomas. The fisherman answered on the fourth ring. "Eli, everything okay?" "I need your help again," Eli said without preamble. "Can you meet me at the marina in 20 minutes? There was a brief pause. "Yeah, I can do that, but what's changed so quickly?" "I'll explain when you get there." "It's about Malcolm Vire." Eli drove to the marina with a sense of urgency he hadn't felt in months. If what Doug said was true, Malcolm had lied about where he lived. Why would he do that unless he had something to hide? When Tomas arrived at the marina, Eli quickly explained what he'd learned at the tavern. "So, he doesn't live on Wolf Island at all?" Tomas said, shaking his head. "I knew something didn't add up. In all my years making deliveries there, I've never seen him or heard mention of him living there." "I want to find his boathouse," Eli said. Doug said it's somewhere in the inlet channels off the main harbor. Tomas looked uncertain. "That's a maze of waterways back there. Some of them are barely navigable. What exactly are you hoping to find?" "I don't know," Eli admitted. "But that man is lying about where he lives. He had my wife's hat, and I'm almost certain those fishing rods belong to Hannah and Sophie. I need to know what else he's hiding. Shouldn't we tell the police about this?" "And tell them what?" Eli retorted. "That a bartender shared some rumors about where Malcolm might be living? They'll want more than that before they do anything. And I just want to see the child for myself. If she's really his niece, then Sophie was." Eli trailed off, unable to finish the thought. After a moment's consideration, Tomas nodded. "All right, my boat's more suitable for the shallow channels anyway. We'll take mine." They boarded Tomas's fishing boat, a sturdy craft designed for coastal waters. As they pulled away from the dock, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the water, the main harbor busy with fishing boats returning from their day's work. But as Tomas steered them toward the network of inlet channels, the traffic thinned and eventually disappeared completely. The channels were narrower than Eli had anticipated, with tall reeds and mangroves crowding the banks on either side. Overhanging trees created a tunnel-like effect in some places, their branches casting dappled shadows on the water. "Not many people come back here," Tomas said, expertly navigating the twisting waterway. "Too shallow for most boats, and there's nothing much to see unless you're into bird watching or botany." "Perfect place to hide," Eli murmured. They continued deeper into the maze of channels, the sounds of the harbor fading behind them. The silence was broken only by the gentle purr of the boat's motor and the occasional call of birds in the surrounding vegetation. "How far do these channels go?" Eli asked after they'd been traveling for nearly 20 minutes. "They eventually open up to the other side of the peninsula," Tomas replied. "There's an abandoned naval station there, all overgrown now, been off limits for years." As they rounded a bend in the channel, Tomas suddenly cut the engine to a near-silent idle. "Look there," he whispered, pointing ahead. In a jagged nook where the channel widened slightly, partially concealed by a natural formation of rocks and vegetation, sat a structure unlike anything Eli had expected. It was an old, long boat, perhaps 40 feet in length, with a weathered cabin structure built on its deck. The boat was secured to a small, crude dock that abutted a low, rocky outcropping. Atop the rocks, nestled among scraggly trees, stood a small cabin. "That has to be it," Eli breathed. Tomas carefully maneuvered their boat into a position where they remained hidden from view, but could observe the unusual dwelling. "What now?" he asked quietly. "We watch," Eli said, "and wait." They didn't have to wait long. After about 15 minutes of observation from their hidden position, movement caught their eye. A figure emerged from the cabin atop the rocks, Malcolm Vire, unmistakable even at a distance. "That's him," Eli whispered unnecessarily. Tomas handed Eli a pair of binoculars. "Keep watching." Through the magnified lenses, Eli observed as Malcolm descended the rough path from the cabin to the boathouse. He disappeared inside briefly, then reemerged and climbed back up to the cabin. This time, when he exited the cabin, Eli's breath caught in his throat. Malcolm was carrying someone over his shoulder. A small figure with blonde hair. "Oh my God," Eli gasped. "He's carrying a child." The figure appeared limp, unmoving. From this distance, it was impossible to make out specific features, but Eli could see it was a young girl no older than 10 or 11. "Is she moving?" Tomas asked anxiously. "I can't tell. She looks unconscious, but a man wouldn't drug his own niece, would he?" They watched in horrified fascination as Malcolm carefully made his way down the path and into the boathouse with his burden. A few minutes later, he reappeared and climbed back to the cabin. Eli immediately reached for his phone. "I'm calling the police. Whether she's his niece, my Sophie, or someone else, it doesn't matter. Something's not right here." His hands trembled as he dialed the number for the coastal police station. When the dispatcher answered, he identified himself and quickly explained what they were witnessing. "We need officers here immediately," he urged, giving their location as best he could. "I believe Malcolm Vire has abducted a child, possibly my daughter." "Stay on the line, Mr. Wells," the dispatcher instructed. "Units are being deployed now." While maintaining the connection with the dispatcher, Eli continued to watch through the binoculars. Malcolm had emerged from the cabin once more, this time struggling with what appeared to be a heavy sack over his shoulder. As Malcolm negotiated the steep path down to the boathouse, he lost his footing momentarily. The sack slipped from his grip and tumbled down the incline, coming to rest at the bottom of the path. Eli zoomed in with the binoculars, and what he saw made his blood run cold. From the open end of the sack, A woman's head was partially visible, blonde hair spilling out onto the ground. "There's a woman," Eli reported to the dispatcher, his voice tight with emotion. "In a sack, I think." He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Malcolm quickly recovered, gathered the sack, and continued to the boathouse. Once again, he disappeared inside, then returned to the cabin. "How long until police arrive?" Tomas asked, tension evident in his voice. "They're on their way," Eli replied, still clutching the phone. "But I don't know how quickly they can navigate these channels." On his third trip from the cabin, Malcolm carried 2 large cooler boxes, the kind used for transporting ice and perishables. He loaded these onto the boathouse as well, then began preparing the boat, clearly intending to depart. "He's getting ready to leave," Eli reported urgently to the dispatcher. "We need to do something now." "Police and Marine units are en route," the dispatcher assured him. "Please do not approach the suspect. He may be armed and dangerous." Eli relayed this to Tomas, who nodded grimly. "We should back out of here. Find a better position where we can still observe, but not be spotted if he comes this way." As they carefully began to reposition their boat, a twig snapped under Tomas's foot, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet channel. Malcolm's head snapped up, his attention immediately drawn to the source of the noise. He reached into his jacket and pulled out what appeared to be a handgun, peering intently in their direction. "He's armed," Eli whispered into the phone. "And I think he spotted us." "Move back immediately," the dispatcher instructed. "Get to safety." Tomas had already shifted their boat deeper into the cover of the overhanging vegetation, but it was clear Malcolm had detected their presence. "I know you're there," Malcolm's voice carried across the water, unnaturally loud in the still air. "Show yourselves." Eli and Tomas remained frozen, barely daring to breathe. A shot rang out, the bullet striking the water several yards from their position. It was a warning shot fired in their general direction rather than a targeted attempt to hit them. "Come out into the open," Malcolm shouted. "No. What do we do?" Tomas whispered frantically. "Stay hidden," Eli replied, his voice barely audible. "Help is coming." As if on cue, the distant sound of boat engines and a helicopter could be heard approaching. Malcolm's head turned toward the sound, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. "Should we try to block his escape?" Tomas asked, nodding toward the channel that led back to the harbor. The dispatcher said not to engage, Eli reminded him, though every instinct in his body screamed at him to confront Malcolm, to demand answers, to find out if the child he'd seen was indeed Sophie. Their decision was made for them as multiple police boats appeared at the mouth of the channel, lights flashing. Above, a police helicopter moved into position, its spotlight illuminating the scene in harsh white light. "Malcolm Vire," boomed an amplified voice from one of the police boats. "This is the Coastal Police. Drop your weapon and surrender immediately." For a moment, Malcolm stood frozen in the spotlight, gun still in hand, his features contorted with rage and panic. The helicopter hovered overhead, its rotors creating a deafening chop that echoed off the water and surrounding rocks. "Drop the weapon. Fire." The command came again. "You are surrounded. There is nowhere to go." With deliberate slowness, Malcolm lowered the gun and then dropped it onto the dock. He raised his hands above his head, his face a mask of cold calculation rather than defeat. Eli watched as 2 police boats approached the dock. Officers with weapons drawn, moving efficiently to secure Malcolm and place him in handcuffs. As they read him his rights, Malcolm's gaze swept the channel, somehow finding and locking with Eli's, even through the distance and concealing vegetation. The look of pure hatred that crossed Malcolm's face made Eli shudder. Then, inexplicably, Malcolm began to laugh, a chilling sound that carried across the water despite the helicopter noise. As one police boat departed with Malcolm in custody, the second boat made its way to where Eli and Tomas remained hidden. "Mr. Wells, Mr. Herrera," an officer called out. It's safe to come out now. They guided their boat into the open channel where the officers directed them to follow them back to the dock near Malcolm's boathouse. Several more police boats had arrived along with what appeared to be emergency medical personnel. Is it her? Is it Sophie? Eli asked desperately as they tied up at the dock. We are still assessing the situation, sir, an officer replied. Please stay here for now. Eli watched in agonizing suspense as officers and medical personnel entered the boathouse. Minutes passed, like hours. Finally, a medic emerged, carefully carrying a small figure wrapped in an emergency blanket. Even from a distance, Eli recognized the blonde hair. Sophie, he cried, lunging forward, only to be held back by an officer. Sir, please let the medics do their job. The girl was quickly transferred to a medical boat, but not before Eli caught a glimpse of her face, pale with unfocused eyes, but unmistakably his daughter. That's her, he choked out. That's my Sophie. Tomas confirmed it as well. That's the girl I saw this morning at the lighthouse. I'm certain now. The officer nodded and spoke into his radio, confirming the identification. We'll get you to the hospital as soon as possible, Mr. Wells, but we need you to remain here for a few more minutes while we secure the scene. Eli's attention was drawn to another grim procession. Officers carefully carrying a body bag from the boathouse to another waiting boat. He didn't need to ask. He knew with devastating certainty who was inside. Hannah, he whispered, grief overwhelming him. He knew, despite the months of searching, despite the official presumption of death, some part of him had continued to hope, against all logic, that she might somehow have survived. As the body bag was secured in the police boat, an officer approached Eli. I'm sorry, sir. We'll need formal identification, but based on your description and the circumstances. Eli nodded numbly. I understand. There's more, the officer said grimly. You should prepare yourself. What we found in the body bag and inside the boathouse regarding your wife, it's deeply disturbing. I don't think I get what you mean. My wife was, he asked, his voice tight with dread. The officer opened the body bag just wide enough for Eli to catch a glimpse inside. He gasped, unable to suppress the terror rising in his chest at what he saw. He had expected to find his wife lying there, but the truth was far worse. Malcolm had torn her apart, her body unervingly altered beyond recognition. Eli dropped to his knees and froze as tears escaped his eyes. Rage and anger filled him, boiling over in a way he couldn't control. His chest tightened with a suffocating pain, the kind that twisted his insides as he struggled to breathe. The image in front of him was unbearable, and yet his eyes couldn't look away. Every fiber of his being screamed in fury, his hands trembling as they clenched into fists, desperate to find some way to lash out, to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before him. Before Eli could process what he had just seen, shouts erupted from the boathouse. Officers emerged carrying two large, cooler boxes, the same ones Eli had watched Malcolm loading earlier. The sight sent a fresh wave of dread through him, his mind racing to comprehend what could possibly be inside. What's in those? Tomas asked, his voice tight with apprehension. The officer's expression was grim. Evidence. Highly disturbing evidence, sir, but that's all I can say for now. More officers emerged from the cabin on the hill, each carrying various items in evidence bags. One held what appeared to be a book or album, while others lugged smaller containers and the fishing toolbox Eli recognized from the lighthouse. His stomach churned at the sight of it, and his mind spiraled with a terrifying question. What could possibly be inside that toolbox? Could anything be worse than what he had already seen? We know you are shocked, sir, but we need to get you both back to the station, the officer said. A boat is ready to take you. I don't think I can do this. I need to go to Sophie, Eli insisted. She needs me. The medical team is taking her directly to Greyhour Memorial Hospital. They're equipped to handle her condition. I promise you'll be reunited with her as soon as possible, but right now she needs immediate medical attention. We also need your statement while the events are still fresh in your mind. I understand how much this has shaken you, so take your time at the station. Reluctantly, Eli agreed. As they were escorted to a waiting police boat, he looked back at the bizarre dwelling Malcolm had created, the boathouse tethered to shore, the hidden cabin on the rocks. What horrors had Hannah and Sophie endured in that place? The boat ride back to Greyhor passed in a blur of shock and grief for Eli. Though Sophie was alive, a miracle he had scarcely dared hope for, Hannah was gone in the most terrible way. And from the grim expressions of the officers who had searched Malcolm's dwelling, whatever had happened there was even worse than he had imagined. When they arrived at the police station, Eli and Tomas were separated to give their individual statements. Eli took some time to compose himself before he began recounting everything in excruciating detail, from Tomas's sighting that morning to their discovery of Malcolm's hidden boathouse. He described the fishing rods, the hat, and every interaction with Malcolm at the lighthouse, making sure to include even the smallest of details that might help piece together the terrifying puzzle. What I don't understand, Eli said after completing his account, is why. Why would he take them? Why keep Sophie alive? But he couldn't finish the sentence. The detective interviewing him, a woman named Rivera, closed her notebook and leaned forward, her expression grave. Mr. Wells, we've been processing the evidence from the boathouse and cabin. I need to prepare you. What we've found is deeply disturbing. Eli steeled himself. Tell me everything. I'll start with the 2 cooler boxes Malcolm was loading onto his boat. They contained preserved human remains, Rivera began, her voice professional yet gentle. Body parts from what appear to be multiple victims, each cleaned and stored like anatomical specimens in glass jars. Every jar was meticulously labeled with dates and names. As for the fishing toolbox, it held the instruments he used for his procedures. As you saw earlier with your wife in the body bag, Malcolm didn't yet have the chance to. She paused, her words trailing off, the rest too horrific to say aloud. Eli felt physically ill. My God. There were also smaller resin crystals, like paperweights or display pieces. Inside these resin blocks were preserved pieces of fabric, personal items, and hair samples. One contained what appears to be your daughter's braids. Eli's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white with rage and horror. He kept trophies. Not exactly trophies, Rivera corrected. Based on the journals we found, he saw these as tributes, preservations. He was obsessed with stopping time, with keeping what he called perfect maternal bonds intact forever. You found his journals and a photo album? They were in his cabin. The album contained staged photographs of Malcolm with his victims posed in what he considered family scenes. He would dress them, position them, and photograph them as if they were his own family. I'm not sure I follow. Why would he do that? Did he? Eli struggled to comprehend the level of madness required for such actions. The nature of his crimes wasn't sexual, Rivera said, understanding his unspoken fear. His fixation was on preservation, on saving these mother-daughter pairs from what he called the ravages of time and chaos. His journals are filled with his philosophy about this. Who is this man really? We've been building a profile, Rivera explained. Malcolm Vire was once a respected maritime engineer who specialized in designing storm-proof offshore structures. 15 years ago, his wife and young daughter died in a ferry accident, a ferry he had helped design. The guilt consumed him. He withdrew from society, eventually using a settlement payout to purchase the Lighthouse. So, his delusion was about replacing his family? Not exactly replacing, Rivera clarified. According to our forensic psychiatrist, Vaya developed delusions of reconstruction and preservation. He believed he could rebuild what he lost by saving new mother-daughter pairs. In his mind, he wasn't harming them, he was honoring them, keeping them safe from time, as he writes repeatedly in his journals. That's twisted, Tomas said, having joined them after completing his own statement. He blamed himself for his family's death, Rivera continued. This appears to have been his disturbed way of making amends by protecting other families from a similar fate. In his writings, he refers to women as symbols of care and chaos, blaming their supposed emotional fragility for the death of his own wife and daughter. And Hannah and Sophie? Eli asked, his voice barely audible. What happened to them? Rivera consulted her notes. We found a detailed account in his journal. It appears Hannah and Sophie did indeed get caught in the storm 8 months ago. Their boat was sinking when they drifted near the lighthouse. Malcolm saw them and helped them dock. He offered shelter, promising to radio for help once the storm passed. But he never did, Eli said, the scenario playing out with horrible clarity in his mind. According to his writings, Hannah quickly became suspicious when he failed to use the radio. When she confronted him, he became hostile and restrained them both in the lighthouse. He kept them chained there while he worked on completing his new cabin and boathouse on Sealbone Island. He was planning to move them, Eli realized. Yes, he wrote that Grey Whore had become too risky, too many eyes watching, too many whispers spreading. And the lighthouse? It was becoming too troublesome to keep going back and forth to feed the women. He was worried someone would notice him sooner or later, which was the case when Mr. Herrera saw him this morning, she said, her voice tightening. He has been preparing to relocate his entire operation to a more isolated location for months. And this morning, when Tomas saw Sophie at the lighthouse, Malcolm had returned to collect some final items. It appears Sophie was still partially sedated, but conscious enough to make her way to the dock during a moment when Malcolm was distracted. That's when Mr. Herrera saw her. If I had stopped, Tomas said, his voice thick with regret. If I had realized. You couldn't have known, Rivera assured him. What matters is that you reported what you saw, and that led us to her. And Hannah, Eli forced himself to ask, when did he? Rivera's expression was grim. Based on the condition of her remains, our medical examiner believes she was killed today, possibly within hours of our arrival. Malcolm may have realized he couldn't transport her alive without risk after Sophie was spotted. Eli closed his eyes, devastated by the knowledge that Hannah had been alive all these months, enduring unimaginable conditions, only to be killed when rescue was so close. How many others? He asked after a moment. We've identified remains from at least 3 other mother-daughter pairs who disappeared from coastal communities within a 100-mile radius over the past decade. We're in the process of notifying families. At least now they'll have answers, even if they're not the ones they hoped for. What happens to him now? Eli asked, his voice hardening. Malcolm Villa will be charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, murder, and numerous other crimes. His attorney may attempt an insanity defense, but given the methodical nature of his crimes and the extensive planning involved, I don't believe such a defense would succeed. Either way, prison or secure psychiatric facility, he will never be free again. Eli nodded, finding small comfort in that certainty. I need to see Sophie now. Can someone take me to the hospital? Of course, Rivera said. An officer is waiting to drive you there immediately. We'll need to speak with you again later. But your daughter is the priority right now. As Eli rose to leave, he turned to Tomas. Thank you for everything. If you hadn't seen her this morning. Go be with your daughter, Tomas said simply. That's what matters now. The drive to Grey Whore Memorial Hospital passed in a blur. When they arrived, Eli was immediately directed to the emergency department where Dr. Patel met him in a private consultation room. Mr. Wells, I've been overseeing your daughter's initial care. How is she? Eli asked, his voice rough with emotion. Physically, she's in remarkably stable condition considering the circumstances, Dr. Patel began. She was heavily sedated when she arrived, but those drugs are beginning to wear off. She's showing signs of malnutrition and has a mild respiratory infection, likely from extended exposure to damp, poorly ventilated conditions. Will she recover fully? From a physical standpoint, yes. With proper nutrition and medical care, I expect her to make a complete recovery. She'll need to remain hospitalized for at least a few days while we treat her respiratory infection and address the malnutrition. After that, assuming there are no complications, she can continue her recovery at home. And psychologically? Eli asked, dreading the answer. That will be a longer journey, Dr. Patel acknowledged. We have a pediatric psychologist, Dr. Morgan, who will be consulting on Sophie's case. Children are remarkably resilient, Mr. Wells, but the trauma she's experienced will require specialized care and support. And my wife, Eli said quietly. Her remains. Dr. Patel's expression softened with compassion. The medical examiner is still conducting the autopsy. It's a necessary part of the investigation, but I assure you she's being treated with dignity and respect. Once the examination is complete, her remains will be released to you for burial arrangements. I just want her to find peace, Eli said, his voice breaking. After everything she endured, she deserves that much. When you're ready, our hospital chaplain or social worker can help you with those arrangements, Dr. Patel assured him. But for now, let's focus on Sophie. She'll be moved to a private room shortly, and you can stay with her as long as you wish. A nurse came to escort Eli to Sophie's room. As they walked, she explained that Sophie was still drifting in and out of consciousness, but her vital signs were strong. Outside the room, Eli paused, steeling himself for what he would find inside. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. Sophie lay in a hospital bed that seemed too large for her small frame. N4 was attached to her arm, and monitoring equipment beeped quietly beside her. Her hair had been cut short, nothing like the long braids she had worn when he last saw her, and her face was paler and thinner than he remembered. But she was alive. His little girl was alive. Eli approached the bed quietly and took Sophie's hand in his. Her fingers were cold, but they curled instinctively around his, and his heart soared at this small response. Sophie, he whispered. Daddy's here. You're safe now. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Eli pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, maintaining his gentle hold on her hand. He would wait as long as necessary for her to wake. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking Sophie's vital signs and adjusting her medications. Eli remained constant at her side, speaking to her softly, promising her safety and love. As twilight deepened outside the window, Sophie's eyelids fluttered again, and this time they opened. Her gaze was unfocused at first, confused, but then she turned her head slightly and saw him. Daddy, she whispered, her voice frail and uncertain, as if she feared he might be a dream. Yes, sweetheart, Eli said, tears flowing freely down his face. It's me. I'm here. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by anguish. Mommy, she said, her face crumpling. The bad man took Mommy away. Eli gathered his daughter gently in his arms, mindful of the 4. I know, baby. I know. She told me to be brave, Sophie whispered through her tears. She said you would find us. And you did. I never stopped looking for you, Eli promised, his voice thick with emotion. Not for one single day. Sophie clung to him, her small body shaking with sobs. I want Mommy to come back. Eli held her tighter, his own grief threatening to overwhelm him. Mommy can't come back, sweetheart. But she loved you so much. She was so brave, and she protected you until I could find you. Sophie nodded, a single tear tracking down her pale cheek. She sang to me every night. Eli gently brushed the tear away with his thumb. That sounds just like her. Eli gathered his daughter into his arms as she began to sob, her small shoulders shaking with grief. He held her, his own tears falling silently as they shared the profound loss of the woman who had been wife and mother, whose courage had kept their daughter alive against impossible odds. I miss her so much, Sophie cried. I miss her too, sweetheart, Eli said. And it's okay to be sad. We're going to be sad for a while, but we have each other now, and we're going to take care of each other. just like Mommy would want. As Sophie's sobs gradually subsided, Eli continued to hold her, rocking gently. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be nightmares, therapy sessions, questions without easy answers, and legal battles. But Sophie was alive, a miracle that had seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. Through the hospital window, sunlight streamed in, warming them both. Outside, the sea stretched to the horizon. The same sea that had taken Hannah from them, but had also, through a series of unlikely events and one fisherman's careful observation, led to Sophie's rescue. They remained locked in their embrace, father and daughter reunited through unimaginable tragedy. Their shared grief, a testament to the wife and mother they had lost. In that moment, amid the sorrow and loss, a fragile hope took root. Not for the life they had lost, which could never be recovered, but for the new one they would build together, honoring the memory of the woman whose love and courage had made it possible. Finally, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. Thanks for your amazing support.